Great sound effect there. Okay, hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is November 15, 2022. I want to thank you. Yes, I'm probably wrong about everything. And it is an honor and a pleasure to be here with Leo Goldsmith. Where in the heck are you calling in from, Leo?
Calling in from Brooklyn, New York.
Oh, Brooklyn. How cool is that? The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
What is the best thing for a human being? Okay. Stumped me already, Jerry. I'd say, I would say satisfaction in what you do.
Yeah.
I would say that. I mean, I was going to say, for me, I like to learn things. I like to know things, but that can be a burden to some people. So that's not going to be very satisfying or helpful or maybe the best thing for everyone. Knowledge can be also overwhelming. But I think if there's things that, the ability to do something and see that reflected somehow in the world is the best thing for some.
Yeah, when you said satisfaction, I was going to say the Devo version or the Rolling Stones version.
Whatever floats your boat, whatever. Yeah.
Okay. So Leo, what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
It really changes, actually, and it changes as it's changed over the course of my life. I mean, I think a lot of, of course, being a person who's interested in film, I would have said visual information, of all kinds, would at certain points in my life would have been the most important. I'm a writer, and obviously language is extremely important to me, and I think language, much devalued, much warped, much tortured as it often is still very important. These days, I think a lot more about sound. And sound, I have a hard time separating sound and tactile haptics sensation, because I think they're very closely related, obviously.
Yeah.
So sound, and obviously sound includes music, which of course is very important to me, but of course includes all kinds of different things. And in fact, it includes, language too, often.
Yeah.
But certainly the non-linguistic sound, and even just sound that doesn't have a source, that doesn't have a name, to me, that's an important source of information for me these days. Something a little, and maybe that's because it seems to me often unstructured or not predetermined in the way that language or even imagery can be. That's where I'm sitting with it, at least.
Yeah, you're anticipating a lot of our subject matter, and I appreciate that. So why do you think humans collect or gather information?
My first instinct in answering that question, I don't know if first instincts are always the best ones, but it was to say power. I don't know why. That's maybe a dark answer to your question.
It's not dark. It's beautiful because everybody says survival, and that's another way of maybe saying power, but power is an amazing answer. See, one thing I want to make clear to you is that I love that you take a moment to think in the silence, that that resonating interval is so intense.
I spent a lot of my day waiting for students to talk. So
but it is really important to me that people feel that they can do that, because I ask a question doesn't mean you have to answer it right away. So do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
Innate.
Yeah.
I would say innate.
Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I
know everything about it from A to Z.
Wow, that's good. So,
An exaggeration, because obviously I'm probably opinionated about things that I don't know that much about. But I think as a little kid, I remember I couldn't do anything until I had it all explained to me ahead of time.
yeah. Well, it's interesting because McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. And see, know everything. That's an amazing thing because can humans think without language?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think because I think there are also lots of things and beings that think that don't have language or
Yeah.
don't rely on language to be, or maybe have language to some extent, but don't rely on it culturally and socially in a way that we do.
Yeah. Do thoughts create emotions?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Chomsky says a language is not just words, it's culture, it's a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Leo, what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
um, I don't know, dance,
Oh,
hum. I'd probably do a lot of humming when my language breaks down. But
that's amazing answers. There's a cliche I love to repeat. It goes, if you can't say it, sing it. If you can't sing it, dance it. And then McLuhan's joke he loved was why did the no, oh, I can't even, it's something about humming. If you don't know the words humming, oh God, I blew it. I can't remember, but I'll
it'll
get it.
come back.
I'll come back someday if I look up my Google list of McLuhan jokes. Okay, here we go. Is your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Feeling, no
Yeah,
question.
yeah,
No question. I
yeah,
think people can convince themselves logically of lots of things that they decide emotionally first.
yeah,
I think all of politics is that way. I think obviously all of human interaction, your friends, your enemies, all of it is emotional.
yeah.
You can spin a whole lot of, and there may be logic to it be as well, but that's a bonus.
There's a bumper sticker on a car in my street. It goes, "Don't believe everything you think." Two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
um, I'd have to figure out what a soul is to be able to answer that question.
Yeah,
I'm not sure there is one.
yeah. Second
If
is,
there is one, probably yes. The answer is yes, but
yes,
I
okay,
wouldn't want to venture a guess as to whether there is a soul or not.
okay. Second one is, can machines think?
Uh, there you go. We're getting into semantics, but thinking in the most basic sense, yes. Thinking in a way that will destroy humanity tomorrow, no.
Yeah. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I wonder what my therapist would say in response to this question. Um,
Wait, you mean the therapist is asking you that, or you're asking the therapist?
what they would say about me.
Oh, what
Um,
they would say about you once you answered it.
yeah, or what I, what I say in response versus how I actually behave. I mean, I think yeah. I mean, to me, they're very intertwined.
Yeah,
I mean, as having just said that, I feel like I need to really understand things a lot, and that gives me satisfaction and comfort in a lot of ways. That is a form of happiness to me. Finding meaning is a form of
yeah,
happiness. But I would say, actually, probably if I had to really buckle down, I would say happiness.
yeah.
I get closer to now I feel like I'm in therapy. I think I get closer to just knowing that I don't know things, or that things are not going to be meaningful, or meaning is going to be elusive to me at some point. So focusing on happiness is better.
Yeah, I got it from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. He says happiness doesn't necessarily last, meaning tends to last. But it is interesting because these you know, is it more this or more that? This woman a couple months ago went, the word more doesn't function in your question. And then one of these young interns in Ann Arbor, we were doing this round robin in a workshop. And, you know, an older guy, I says, is it this or that? And he goes, well, it's both. And she goes, that's a cop out. It's like, no, it's not a cop out. You can say both. You know.
I'm trying not to say both, even though I basically probably have said both to everything. The thing with that response to that Viktor Frankl, the idea that meaning tends to last longer, perhaps, but when meaning ceases to exist, that's a real problem. So focusing on meaning and being really sure of those meanings can be the key to unhappiness.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, we should just skip to this and we'll go back. This is T.S. Eliot. I had the experience. They had the experience, but missed the meaning. So here's McLuhan. Everybody experiences far more than they understand. Yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior. Now, I'm going to tell you what I think that means. It doesn't mean it's right. The kid comes in from the cold and he goes up to the stove. The parent goes, don't touch the stove. You'll burn your hand. If the parent goes like this, I'm going to teach you the dynamics of heat. Understand that you can get really close to the stove, rub your hands together and warm your hands. So I think what McLuhan's saying is experience shapes our behavior, but understanding should shape our behavior more. Like, what is your take on that? Everybody experiences far more than they understand, yet is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about your story is that I have a 9-month-old baby.
Yeah.
So I'm just worried about the kid touching the stove. That's all I can think of. But that's an important. Maybe that's an important. I don't know. Maybe that's a way to answer your question. Is, this kind of instinct of care and protection obviously includes the need to educate your child not to burn themselves on the stove, but there are different phases of it. Maybe there's different there's the time when you need to just like pick the kid up whether he likes it or not and sort of shove him across the other side of the room
and shove them across and say, that's what someone said the other day. You go, don't say don't. You just say, oh, look it over here. You just
distraction.
Yeah. You just say, let's move over here, because you don't. Yeah, that's amazing. And you don't know. Maybe the kid would be better off if he burned his hand a little and then he learned, or maybe he's better off, or they're better off if you go, let's go over here, or, honey, that's hot, but don't get too close, and try to reason with a baby.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I have this debate internally, 25 times a day, is he going to fall? If he falls off, is he going to learn not to fall off the thing or,
25 times a day, man. Are you having fun?
Oh yeah.
Are you a house dad?
No, my partner and I both have jobs that, I have a teaching job, which means that I'm teaching, really 3 days a week. I'm at the office and teaching, and doing office hours and stuff like that, but I can be home 2 days a week, 2 plus the weekend.
Beautiful. Leo, it's really fun. I appreciate your time. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
This is another question I would have answered differently at different times in my life. I have the image right now of like something more out of something like David Cronenberg, where consciousness is some kind of like virus or parasite we're that sort of takes over every once in a while, but and then we're constantly trying to figure out exactly where it's located in our bodies. But I think that there's a co-creative element too. I think that I think that there's a way in which and I get not to be tedious new dad here, but you see that kind of emerging, not just the kid becoming conscious of himself, but of making his own identity and his own consciousness in various different ways, which is fascinating.
Beautiful. I love that co-create. And I love you brought up Cronenberg, because I showed in Ann Arbor in the 70s, I showed this film called Rabid, I think, with Marilyn and Chambers in the trailer, because I was a trailer freak. He goes, if you don't squirm when you see this movie, you better go see a psychiatrist. I go, that's great trailer writing. I used it in my trailer too.
Yeah.
I just ripped that sucker off. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
In my case, speed of light for sure.
Audre Lorde, the poet, said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded, said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
I mean, I kind of subscribe, I think, more to Audre Lorde in this situation. But I also think that, I've done a lot of, in my kind of doctoral work and in my teaching and writing, I've done a lot of work on the situationists and the lettrists. And, they would have said that there are different moments in historical moments where you're building, you're using tools and really trying to construct things. And then there's moments, historical phases, again, think of hard history or political history, when you're tearing down.
Yeah.
I do think that I do think that we're in a moment of tearing down at the moment.
Yeah.
And these things, destruction has positive and negative consequences, of course. Now, what tools do you use to do that? Well, it's tricky, because I do think, again, using the master's tools, but the master's tools are, they're everywhere. I think that focusing on the dismantling, I wouldn't know what tools to start with, but I think you have to start dismantling. Maybe this is the Yvonne Rainer part of it, is that you have to start dismantling the tools themselves. With your bare hands, with your consciousness, with your critical mind. But we're all, we're very much in the master's house right now, I think, it's great that we get to talk to each other and here in the master's house, but here we are.
It's the master's house. Indeed. This is live TV. If this was New York City in the 50s, it would be big clunky cameras. It is amazing what's happened. Live TV across the world into the newsphere. But it's good that you said that, because it's almost like you insinuated tearing down is the tool. And then you said, critical thinking. But I have to interject this, because it happened to me last night at the fucking, probably the greatest place to screen a film in the world right now. And it's the Academy's new movie museum, Wilshire and Fairfax, in a geodesic dome, a book, and they have 2 screens. Have you been there yet?
I haven't been there. I've heard a lot about it. Most folks who work there.
Huh?
Yeah, I haven't been.
Yeah, but I mean, I saw the Nam June Paik documentary there in the big screen. I saw Sans Soleil in the small venue a year ago, and then I saw this last night. So I sit down. A woman sits next to me. The film starts. She starts diddling on her cell phone. So I do a visual and I go like this, no words. She turns to me and goes, "Shut the fuck up." And I
Great response.
literally get up and move a couple seats away. Now, the person who's opened the screening, who's the head of the museum, could have said, don't use cell phones. My friend said, no, she should say, if you're going to use your cell phone in the next 2 hours, please leave the auditorium now. She could have said it that way. I thought that's an interesting way to say it, because I've dealt with this since cell phones come out, being a curator, a programmer. And before I would say, you can't, no cell phones, please. And then someone uses it and they go, my father's dying, I have to monitor it. I was like, go in the hallway, but you can't say that. They're going to say, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
And now, in the last 5 years, I've realized you can't say that, because they are not able to even see the screen unless they have access to their little screen. That they've mutated. And I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. So what are we watching? A subversive video artist who's practically telling you, yeah, shoot the shit off my fucking big screen and go home and edit it and be subversive with the tools. And if they say don't use your cell phone, use it. But I was like, well, can you learn about the subversive art for 90 minutes without your tool and then go use it? Because I don't want it flashing in my face. But I mean, in essence, it's probably an issue. How do you think that, not how I handle it? People say, no, you were right, you move. It has nothing to do with her. It's me. I have to move. But what is your take? You deal with younger people, cell phone technology in movie screenings and in your classroom. Is there any thoughts you have on this phenomenon? Like, just let them mutate and that's human change, or,
let them mutate is a pretty good statement of pedagogical intent.
Well, actually, I shouldn't say let them, let us. Everybody.
Let us. Yeah. I think, I mean, it's interesting. I of course, think of my students, and there are many students that I have who definitely, struggle with, attention and with having screens and wanting to look at screens in class, wanting to look at screens, during a movie, things like that. But interestingly, I don't think of it as very generational.
Really?
Not anymore. Not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore.
Because I actually think that people who are older, including me, I mean, I think they could struggle with it as well. I think in some cases, not all cases, but students that I have who are, 19, 20 years old, they've spent their entire educational career basically being told by educators to put their fucking phone away or have it confiscated. Now, I'm not a cop, and I don't really want to treat my classroom like I'm going to start confiscating phones and things like that. But many of them have had that as part of their, let's say, high school, middle school, and maybe even before upbringing. So I tend to think that actually younger folks at least know that they shouldn't be using their phones. Now, somebody older might just not even think about it. Or care about it, or have that kind of practice with it. The other thing, I mean, I think it really depends on the situation. The situation that you're describing would have pissed me off too, and I would have said something. I would have also tried to do it quietly and and politely, and been annoyed when I got an impolite response. But it's funny how different contexts where you think people are going to be more on board, let's say, or more simpatico about phone etiquette, and they're not. I mean, if you go to a major film festival and you're surrounded by people who work in film industry for a living, let's say press or industry folks, publicists and things like that, they're on their phones all the goddamn time. I mean, it's actually worse. So, my students would have the good common sense to like dim their screen and look at it under a coat or something like that where they knew I couldn't see it. Not those people, they're just going to bust it out.
I was going to use you an example. Like 3 or 4 years ago in Ann Arbor, I saw this kid doing Facebook in his pocket. And I was like, you're in the Ann Arbor Film Festival, but look, it's like protocol. it doesn't matter that, it's about breaking the rules, like Tony Conrad said, the artists break rules that haven't even been made yet,
Yeah.
So it is a funny phenomenon because it's like, well, I want you to learn about Nam June Paik and I would love you to pay attention. But my one friend said, no, you go find the manager. Don't go to the usher. Go find the manager, and the manager and the usher will go up to them and say, oh, you can't do this. And you have nothing to do with it. Well, then they know it was you 2 seats down, and then they shoot you walking out of the theater. It ain't worth it.
And you missed 20 minutes of the movie. So what's
that's the whole thing. I did not want to miss any of the film squabbling with her because I went through this once at a film festival and I said, dude, did your parents teach you? This is a 10-minute film. I said, dude, did your parents teach you to not pay attention for 10 minutes? And he put it away. Then he pulled it back out and he started playing chess in 10 minutes. The director of the festival's petting his dog 2 seats away. So they hear us. And then I start taking notes and he turns to me, he says, did your parents teach you to take notes during a film? You're not paying. What's the difference? And then at the end of the 10-minute film, he goes, let's be friends.
I mean, the other thing too is that, speaking of like, using the master's tools to tear down the master. I mean, that's definitely related. I like Tony's quotation as well. I mean, I think also there's different kinds of films, there's different kinds of contexts. Here in New York City, many different kinds of places like Film Forum, where if you so much as sort of sneeze the wrong way, you'll get shushed by people. And then there's other places where there's open drinking and drug use going on. If all maybe worse, who knows? And that's great. Like that kind of variety is nice. I mean, I guess it's a set and setting kind of thing. It's like are you in the right place for this kind of, maybe playing chess on your phone would be better in a different movie theater.
It's like in Michigan, where I was raised, you go to the Black Theater and they'll yell, don't open that door.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of places, lots of different cultures around the world. They're not, like film snobs like me, who are going to be shushing, like, don't put your phone, it's sometimes a film screening is a party, sometimes sometimes it's a fiesta.
Well, the other one little thing, sorry to go on and on about this, Leo, but I appreciate this because you're deep in the swamp muck of all this, is that there's actually a phenomenon. I go, we've all decided to watch one screen for the next 90 minutes. Guess what? No, there's been 2 screens from day one. The green exit sign is a light emitting screen. And immediately I looked and there it was in the best theater in the world. There was the green exit sign. And I thought, because when we show at Beyond Baroque, the Poetry Center, we have no green exit sign. So I love it that there's no, it's probably
I hope the fire marshal's not watching this one.
Yeah, it's probably illegal.
I did hear a story about the French filmmaker Philippe Grandrieux, and he made a film a number of years ago called Un Lac, a lake. And the film is beautiful. I don't think it was ever released in this country officially, but if you get a chance to see it, it's beautiful. Very, very dim image. He's shooting a lot of low light, this kind of natural snowy setting. I think in Russia, maybe. Yeah. But anyway, it's very, very dim. And I had heard this rumor, which made sense to me because, he's kind of a wacky guy, that he actually, when he originally showed it, he wanted to like turn off the exit signs. Yeah. And of course, I think nobody let him do that. But what's interesting too is that as soon as it, I saw it with subtitles, and of course the subtitles are like, 300 watts brighter than the screen. They're screwed up the whole effect anyway.
Isn't that funny that they illuminate? Yeah. Did you see the documentary on subtitling?
I didn't. I should see it.
It's a must, because dig this. Mussolini invented the film festival, but he also invented dubbing because he didn't want people, he wanted them to hear in their own, whatever you call that, tongue.
Yeah. I knew that. That's why you get all those Euro pudding films, with like where like Broderick Crawford comes over and he's a gangster in an Italian mob movie, and then the Leopard with you got Burt Lancaster and Claudia Cardinale and Alain
Yeah.
Delon all speaking different languages at each other.
Yeah.
Clint Eastwood, right? And he
Yeah.
dubbed himself in English, but yeah. So all those.
Wow.
I teach a class on sound, so I actually talk about that a lot. I don't talk a lot about Mussolini. I should give him a little more credit.
Not at this point. We don't want to. No, that was good. But it's also the multi-screen thing is. I've always been curious if anyone reads Man Who Fell to Earth book, because that's when we saw the multi-TV screen, Bowie watching 17 screens, when it was at the same time. The two people who watched more TVs than one at that time were, do you know what the two?
Howard Hughes is one of them.
Whoa, that adds to my list. Nixon and Elvis.
Nixon and Elvis. That's right. That's right. Hughes is more of a cinephile, I think. But I think that there was, unless I'm mixing them up, I think there was a period in his life when he was watching like a bunch of TVs. But Nixon and Elvis.
I mean, that's all we watch now. We all are addicted to multi-screens, and we have no choice.
Yeah. Well, my friend in Atlanta, Gregory Zinman, who teaches over at Emory, has been working on a big project about the video wall.
Yeah.
All these artists, who were working sometimes in clubs in New York City, Palladium and places like that, working with the video wall as a thing. And then, of course, it became very, a feature of things like MTV and game shows and stuff like that. But lots of artists worked in the video wall as a format as well at different times. I think,
multi-screen,
Yeah. And I mean, it's a way, he'd done a bunch of work before on light shows. Yeah. So, it's kind of, in a way, it's a kind of electrified light show or something like that.
Exactly.
But it's also how we live today and how we're talking to each other.
Yeah. And there it is, multi-screen. So Hollywood Squares. Okay. So following the script here, what new toy do you suggest?
Ooh, what new toy? It's funny. I feel having a new kid, you buy a lot of junk, and you buy a lot of things hoping it's going to be the thing that solves every problem. And it usually does not. I have a lot of toys I don't recommend. Let's just put it that way. I'm also not much of a gadget. I mean, I feel like I'm technically proficient. I don't, I always find it very funny when people who are like film and media scholars are like real klutzes with like gadgets and stuff like that. Yeah. I think it's very funny. I mean, not no shade. It's just, it's a complicated world out there. But I'm not much of a gear guy, and I don't really, I mean, I'll tell you one that this is a very simple one just because I bought it yesterday. And so far so good. Pool noodles. If you want a pool noodle, which is like a piece of, foam that you bring into, it's a long noodle shaped piece of foam that you would bring in a pool with you, kind of helps you keep
afloat. Pool noodles, I know those. Yeah,
but that you buy them, and usually or often they have a kind of a cut down the side, down the lengthwise cut, so you can actually wrap them around hard edges.
Yeah.
So if you got any hard edges in the home, Jerry,
then
you consider the pool noodle.
Pool edge so the kid don't bump his head.
Exactly. Exactly. Cool. It's probably going to be useful for me too. I'm going to, get my shins, dinged in or something like that. But I got the pool noodle. I'm all set.
No, dude, I'm a dumpster diver. Pool noodles come in. Yeah, I could deliver you 10 a week. mint with no cat poop. Okay. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Oh God. You want the list?
Well, top two.
Getting enough sleep is one for obvious reasons, but a more serious one. I'm thinking, I'm teaching in the morning, so of course my head's spinning about things that I'm teaching, things that I've taught 1,000 times, and I still get, once I'm teaching, in the middle of a semester, this is sort of very shop talk for teachers, but the flow is okay and you feel good, but I still get opening night jitters. I still walk into a classroom for the first time feeling like, not dread exactly, but like nervous. Sometimes dread, depending on the day. And I still, and I think this is very true. Probably a lot of educators feel this too. I still feel unprepared.
Yeah.
And it's a funny thing about teaching where you can prepare and prepare and prepare and prepare, and it can still go terribly. Yeah. Or you can go in there and have no idea what you're going to do, and it's a home run. But you can never predict either of those instances, and it's always a performance. Actually, it's always so I think that's why that nervousness comes in. But I spend a lot of time, not a lot of time, but certainly if I'm lying in bed at night, I'm thinking I'm going to walk out there in front of 74 students and talk about Fritz Lang's M. Yeah. And I'm waiting for one of them to just stand up and say, bullshit.
Well, you'll love this. I've done one-offs, and I did one at Cal Arts, about 2 hours lecturing about pixel vision for Steve Anker, and I was really lucky because I begged him for 10 years. Come on, let me do this. And if it took 10 years, if I did, and yeah, I'm doing all this like stand-up comedy kind of presentation, and at one point, this woman raised her hand. She goes, "What do you do for a living?" I said, "I do nothing effectively." And they all crack up, and she gave me the evil eye that's forever imprinted in my brain. I will never erase it because she knew I was just fucking with her, and she wanted, I'd have a cab on the side or something. And it was really beautiful what she did with her face after I said that, So it is amazing, this whole relationship you have, especially when you said the word performance. We're going to get into education, but let's do this one. McLuhan learned from Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might be able to learn to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Leo, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Capitalism?
That's I always get fear. We're too busy. Great answer.
I mean, it makes sense to me. I mean, I just was thinking about, I'm thinking a little bit about that sort of like idea of like just reproducing technological advancements and, tech bros telling us we need all, kinds of new toys that are not as useful as cool noodles. And, it's really about this drive to just make more and do, and like buy more and all this crap. Yeah. And I think that is why we don't pause on, I think that we're seeing this right now with AI and machine learning technologies really, really, really clearly. I mean, if anybody spends, obviously there's a lot of talk about, it's going to be Terminator 2 on Thursday and we're all going to be wiped out. Yeah. That's less, the apocalypse will be much more boring and annoying. Yeah. And I think that there are ways of pumping the brakes on that stuff, and people just simply do not want to do it.
Yeah. Great word. Really good, really well put. Do artists have moral obligation?
I would say more ethical obligation. And actually, even that, I'm not sure. Moral obligation, maybe not more than any other human. I think, so in terms of moral obligation, yes, but not more than me or anybody that you would meet, any other human. Ethical obligation, to anticipate a follow-up question, perhaps, is a different question. Obviously, ethics a bit more. Obviously, both of these are potentially fuzzy categories or flexible categories, depending on your culture and background. But I think I think these days we think a lot about the ethics of artistic production, and I think that that's good. I think that in recent years, in particular, not just Me Too, but also all kinds of other sort of
Yeah.
movements of decolonization, and and kind of queer politics and trans politics. The idea of really trying to make sure that representation has a kind of ethical dimension, and I think that that's on the whole good. I would also say that some of my favorite artists were complete lunatics and were unhinged in ways that are not excusable necessarily, but certainly in all ways. But certainly, I do think that part of being an artist is actually it includes a dimension of skirting boundaries, and sometimes those are ethical boundaries. That doesn't necessarily mean people should rush out and skirt ethical boundaries just to do it. But it does mean that the artist's work necessarily entails, I think, sometimes pushing beyond comfort zones. And I do think that that's an important dimension to keep in mind, if not always, not to use that as a blanket excuse, but to keep that in mind when we're talking about what artists do and what their job is, and and also I think crucially what we demand of them. Which comes back to capitalism, I guess. But we as a society often demand them to be the button pushers. So we can't. We need to take some responsibility when they push the wrong button. If that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense, and it delves into that separating the art from the artist. George Carlin said the role of the comedian is to draw a line and then cross it. So there, and so Craig,
comedians are a great example of that, I think, and there's a lot of examples of comedians who've done really horrible things that I think that we can, there's a lot of, Richard Pryor was a total, I love Richard Pryor. I think Richard Pryor was one of the great comedians, but he was a horrible person and really did terrible things. But there is a lot in the role of the comedian, of the clown, that comes from, not in all cases, of course, but comes from often places of real pain. And that's why it is effective, because it comes from places of real pain. And we have to kind of understand and maybe, not excuse, but try to sympathize a little bit with that, the way in which a person becomes a Richard Pryor, an extremely funny person. It came at the cost of a very, damaging life.
Yeah. There's a lot to go there. I asked Craig, because you brought up capitalism and colonialism. I asked Craig Baldwin once, film as an art form has been swindled by capitalism. Any thought on that? I read that in the LA Times. I don't even know who said it. And he goes, yeah, and it's our job to swindle it back. Now, in a way, that's like, well, we don't want to become our enemy, do we? So, what's your take on that? Just that quote and then his reaction.
Well, I think film is interesting to me, and certainly people like Godard were very fascinated by this dimension. Is that it exists because of capitalism. It's one of those. It's one of those industrial inventions. It's one of those sort of industrial assembly lines. It doesn't always have to function in a sort of studio system with that kind of industrial format. Obviously, you and I both love a lot of artists who are working with film, but film technologies, they are definitely produced in kind of capitalist context, and mode of industrial production that is totally bound up with capitalism. But so is everything, right? So of course, yes, some swindling back from capitalism is part of our job, I think, and that's true wherever we are, and of course, I think we don't want to confuse the relationships we have with that overall structure necessarily. But yes, swindling back, I like that.
It was a great line, but it's also what you said, that there was a lot packed into that. I have to ask you, well, no, you really are smart, Leo, because when I say film as an art form has been swindled by capitalism, people go, everything's been swindled by capitalism. I mean, what hasn't? So, it's that word swindle,
Mm,
capitalism has services and disservices if you study McLuhan. And it's our job to suss them out so that we can see the big picture and how it shaped our behavior.
yeah,
But did you see this? I have to interject this. Did you see the Beyond the Bolex documentary?
I didn't. I
Oh
should
my
see it.
God.
Yeah, I need to see it.
You know about it. So the
I
girl,
do know
the
about
woman
it.
goes
Yeah.
up to her film teacher and goes, "Yeah, my grandfather had been in the Bolex." He goes, "What?" And the dude had like experimental films, and it took her 16 years to make it. And
Wow.
it's worth, it's worth being a film person that you are. She's got, Jonas in it and Barbara, or whoever these people, a lot of these people who died, but she covers a lot. But staying on art for a second, this is Mike Kelly. I'm curious your reaction to his quote. Art is making your problems other people's problems. Good laugh, dude. What do you think of that?
Mm. I might describe his art.
Yeah.
uh, I like that. I mean, I think it's very funny. To me, it's a very funny turn of phrase. I don't know that I understand it
Yeah.
specifically, or I don't know that I can generalize it across all art. But I do like. I mean, I definitely know. I definitely know a lot of artists for whom that is true.
Yeah.
My friend Joshua again Solons, who's a filmmaker and sadist. I think he would absolutely subscribe to that
Yeah.
view of art for him at least.
And then the other one is Fanny Howe, the poet.
Hmm.
The point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't. Now, that again, I don't know what that means, but I'm just curious if you have any feelings on that.
I'm more of a Susan Howe person than a Fanny Howe, but I don't 100% know, but I think that it makes me think a little bit about the kind of the sort of weird relativism that we all have to do day to day to survive, is to think of our own lives as being extremely precious and the lives of the people that are dear to us being extremely precious.
Yeah.
But obviously we can't think about that we can't extend that same concern to all of life.
Yeah.
Maybe we can extend it to all of humanity. That'd be nice. That's hard for a lot of people to do, it seems. But I think, we could try to extend that to all of our species, but we can't think about every microbe. It just isn't possible because, of course, and in that sense, life is not precious life is precious,
Yeah.
but it's, it ends, and it's not going to be precious it's not going to be as we all make those, choices in our existence. Now, the idea of it being worth living, I don't know. I don't know the point of comparison personally.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. Is Susan Howe a filmmaker, a poet, or just a friend? She's a poet too. So
Sister of Fanny Howe.
oh, she's the sister.
Yeah.
Wow, that's good to know.
I think so. I'm pretty sure they're related. I believe they are sisters.
Well, you just brought up death, so I have to shove this one in. Hollis Frampton. Narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die.
Mm.
Can you forget to die?
Not forget, but I think we all know people who've died. It's interesting things happen when obviously people die suddenly. They didn't forget. It just came for them. But people who have had a long illness, or, are coming to the end of their life, and their body is shutting down in various different ways. Maybe their mind is too. Oftentimes they still don't die. And it's not because they've forgotten, maybe, or maybe it is, but it's still because they have something else. There's something they need to do. There's something that they can't let go.
Yeah, they can't let go.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that, I think about, I mean, I think about a number of people who have died and, who I've known. And it just seemed like they were hanging on by a thread, or not even a thread, that but they were just, I mean, I was, I worked for George Stoney a number of years ago, the documentary filmmaker. George Stoney died, I think he was 96 or 97. And he taught at NYU. He taught documentary at NYU until he was about 95 or 96. He was only, he didn't have a very long retirement. And when I was his second to last TA, and he was teaching this course on documentary, and he would walk the 5 blocks from the faculty housing to the lecture room. And he was very frail, but he would make it there very slowly. And he had some help getting there. Sometimes he would take a taxi. And he said, he said, I need you to do all the grading. He was very apologetic about it, but he's like, I can't really see anymore. So, you've got to do it. But he kept teaching, and I think in many ways, it's not that it kept him going. It's just that he had to keep doing it.
Yeah.
He believed that while he was still able to get up in the morning, that he had something to do. Not because it was a way of keeping himself busy, it was because he had to do it, because he still had something to give. And I have to say, you oftentimes when people die and they're 97, you're like, great. I mean, I'm sorry he died, but what a great life,
Yeah.
But when he died, I was very sad.
Yeah.
Because I thought this guy he's had 10 years in him left anyway, somewhere, something like that. I don't know. He didn't have 10 years, but it was a real lack, because,
sounds like an inspiration too. It's like his lifeblood, compulsion.
Yeah.
So Leo, are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Old ones.
Yeah.
Old ones are hard to shake. There's always more than you can find. There's always more than you can figure out. I think new ideas, to me, they're interesting. I mean, I think, of course, you need a balance in your life. It can't all be innovation. I think newness is itself a problem sometimes, but I would say I'm more afraid of old ideas.
Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
The one that I have no idea if this is actually my earliest, but the one that I always go back to is that I'm in my backyard of my parents' house. And it's the summertime. I'm on a swing set that I really loved, swinging on the swing. And I can remember it really, it's really bright and summery.
Yeah.
And the grass has just been cut, and it is like matted, when you get the old lawnmower, and then you got to get under there with a stick to get out all the clumps of matted, then there's a big, like, clumps of these things everywhere. There's a big pile of them. And I stop the swing to get off, and I want to touch the grass. It's just so beautiful. I want to just touch it because it's just glistening and wet and messy and extremely vibrant in color. And as soon as I do that, a giant sheepdog comes out of the woods or from nowhere and then just chases me around the yard.
Wow.
That's obviously been massaged over the years, because that's just how memory works. But I'm sure Stan Brakhage is in there somewhere talking about all the colors, how many colors are in a blade of grass. I'm sure it's all in there. But
is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
More a blessing.
Yeah.
As somebody who has a terrible memory, I'm going to say more of a blessing.
Tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Ooh. I'll start with the outside, and because we were talking about George Stoney, I'll mention him again just because there's a lot. I mean, probably people watching this. I don't know. Did you ever know George, Jerry?
I didn't know George.
He's more in the documentary world,
Yeah.
specifically, and he had a long career of making in some cases sponsored films and industrial documentaries, many of which are really great. All My Babies is probably the classic film that he's known for, which was a film that he made in, I believe he was from Alabama, and he was made in Alabama. And it was a film that was made to educate midwives who were at that particular time and place largely African-American, and in most cases illiterate because of the times. I believe this was in the 1950s or early 60s. I can't remember the year. But he made this documentary, which, and he made it in Alabama. And it's a very remarkable film, even though it's an instructional film, essentially. Anyway, yeah. He was a very courageous guy, very good guy, and an excellent storyteller, but also a really, as hinted from the story about him teaching, even right to the end. He was a very dedicated teacher, but he was specifically interested in connecting with students on an emotional level. Nice. And in fact, he often had them read, he wanted them to be very personal in how they engaged with the class. So we watched films about birth, about death, about war, about, all kinds of subjects, as you can imagine. And he wanted them to write responses every week that would connect it to their own lives. And he wanted them to read those responses in class. And it was my job as his helper to find the person in the class who'd be willing to read this aloud and then browbeat them into doing it. And it quickly became this thing where people would get up every week in this class, read something extremely personal to them about a friend who had died, a brother who had been traumatized in the Iraq War, a guy who his daughter had just been born. They would get up and read these extremely personal stories and then weep, really like sob in front of the classroom. And I've never tried to replicate this, but, he really wanted this engagement, and people were really, they weren't, chomping at the bit to cry in front of the room, but they gave it their energy because they knew that this was a special way to engage with each other and with the films and this kind of thing. And in fact, George told a very moving story about, he was a big proponent of organ donation. So we watched a film about that issue. And he talked about how his daughter, who had died, had donated her organs. And he told the story in tears.
Wow.
And, and I don't say that that's anyway, that's I'm role model. I'm not trying to make people cry, but that kind of dedication, not just to teaching, but to things that you do to make these things matter and personal and important to you.
You really explained it well too, because it is important that people realize film is not just this technical thing, that it's hard to cover both ends, feeling, head and heart,
Yeah. And within my own family, it's funny. I mean, I don't know. I can't think of a real specific role model right off the top of my head. It's funny, even people who were very important to me as role models in many ways, like my father, but he did things that were completely different. We had very different politics, very different, philosophies of life, very different careers, very different approaches. But, he was somebody who, he worked in fashion, but on the business side of fashion. And he had this creative side to him because he worked in a kind of creative industry. And that was kind of one of the only hints in my family of that you could do things that weren't just like being a banker or a lawyer or a doctor or and I don't think he ever really, I think he did eventually understand like my own personal path, but it was still very different from his experience. But anyway, that I think having that idea that there's a creative side to things as well as a practical side was important. to learn.
Very good, Leo. Yeah. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
No. I was born in the UK. All of my family's British and English, and so we are technically Church of England, Anglican. But that's basically like being an atheist. I mean, it's like I'm probably going to offend somebody by saying that, but no. I mean, people in the United Kingdom are extremely unreligious. You know, Catholics in Ireland, Northern Ireland, you know, they're a bit more dedicated. But Church of England is a religion, as I understand it. I don't really know because I never really was raised in it, but it's a religion that was created just so that Henry VIII could get a divorce. That's how it was told to me.
Wow.
And my parents were not. It's not that they were atheists. Even they weren't like they just didn't believe in God. They just had no. They were very pragmatic people. They're very practical people. They didn't really see a lot of. They just didn't. I think they didn't enjoy it when they were kids, and they weren't going to force it on us. So,
do you pray?
You know, strangely enough, being raised in that kind of environment of not having any religion, you know, I don't know that I would say I was spiritual or something like that, but I'm, you know, occasionally superstitious. It sort of changes with the weather. This is one of those things that's more emotional than intellectual, because rationally I don't believe in it at all.
Yeah.
But I definitely, cross my fingers every once in a while.
If God, yeah, really, if God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
I'm really trying to think of something that's not just a silly joke.
The
bars over there was the first thing that popped into my head, but
right,
I really
the bars over there. Yeah, I'm glad. I mean, you wouldn't believe, Leo, how much 80 to 90% you could probably guess what people say, but it is, you know, it's a stupid kind of question, but it's
in a way it's not. I mean, I don't know. It's funny. Yeah,
the bars over there. That's actually
stick with that one.
Let's stick with it. Well, you know what it is. People go, "You did a good job." You know,
yeah,
that's all they want to hear. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Again, a kind of Cronenbergian answer, but I'm going to say the latter. I do not believe that evil people exist.
Yeah. But the real question, Leo, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
That's certainly true. And I think people waste a lot of time in responding to their explicitly responding to enemies and adversaries of all kinds.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's just so many ways in which this is so obvious to an outsider, but once you're in this sort of entanglement, it's hard to flip the script. It's hard to eject yourself from that antagonistic relationship, let's say.
Yeah.
But I think I do like that idea of Fellini's quotation of needing the enemy, because I see that in a lot of people that I know, is that they really need some kind of framework, or and usually with an antagonist attached to it that they're sort of pushing against. And oftentimes those same people, when they find themselves in positions of relative freedom, let's say they're able to become more of a freelance, person, or they're able to work they have a little bit more, they get older, they get a little bit more financial independence, and they don't have to work within the nasty machine that's kind of kept them going, that they actually sort of don't know how to frame them, their what they do anymore. And I think that sometimes is an interesting, you know, and you know, that the enemy, even if the person spends their entire life just being like, God, this person's driving me fucking crazy, you know, sometimes it can be useful. For myself, I'm not sure that I'm that person. I'm not very competitive. I tend to shy away from that kind of relationship. At the same time, it can always give us a little juice to have, you know, somebody that we that we hate, for lack of a better word.
Well, it's
hate doesn't need to do with it.
Yeah, it's funny because I just had the 33rd year of my Pixel Fest, and I'd always say, so what'd you love and what did you hate? Or I say this in Ann Arbor all the time. So what'd you love and what'd you hate in that last show? And they go, well, I didn't hate anything. And then they'd, by a couple lines, they'd go, well, I did hate that one, you know, because hate is such a, it's like, well, that's an extreme word. But, you know, you evoked Walt Whitman. I no doubt deserve my enemies. That's that's almost like Fellini one step beyond. I don't know, but you must.
And that's tricky, because if you find that you have an enemy that really sucks, then you're like, well, what good am I? You know, it's like having, you know, seeing it's worse. It's, you know, enemies, having worthy enemies, you know, feels sometimes empowering, right? But if you have a shitty enemy that's just like a boring, then you're just nobody, you know.
You're well, you must have ESP because you use that word competition. I used to ask this question, are we hardwired for competition? But I set up with Nassim Taleb said games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, you don't know who wins or loses, but you can tell who a hero is. Then my friend said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. Gregory Bateson says, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, I did something morally and socially wrong? So again, it's too many prompts, I know, but a basic question is, does punishment work?
No, I think ultimately no. Punishment, in some cases, depending on how you define it, and in some, you know, there's the like negative feedback, right? Is a way of education. You know, it's a way of, that's information that your brain can adapt to and understand. But unfortunately, I think that we're generally too preoccupied by negative reinforcement, you know, that sort of negative feedback as the way of, I think if you're focused too much on negative, on punishment or negative information, negative feedback, in order to, that's not a productive model. It's not a generative model. Yes, people can learn from that, but it's not, I don't think it's going to get you very far, personally.
Yeah. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
It's hard to live life. It's hard to see the tree, you know. I think I mean, this is corny maybe, but I think I understand and appreciate the world and my life a lot more having watched a lot of movies. That's a pathetic thing to say, maybe. I mean, some people might find that's terrifying, but to me it's like a way of, you know, re-engaging, because if it was just all you know, living your life and experiencing things, I don't think you'd see any of it. I think it needs to be not just made beautiful. It needs to be made sensible. It needs to be given meaning, which I think, you know, I don't know that life has meaning, but I think art in the sense that it can create meaning is great, and
Yeah.
it's useful. Maybe it deludes some people into thinking that life has more meaning than it does, but that's maybe not a terrible thing.
It's not. Yeah.
So
You can live vicariously, and maybe that's good. And it's both. Like Warhol said a great thing. He says we learned everything how to smoke, how to kiss, how to litter, how to drive a car from movies. So Reagan gets to the White House with that kind of attitude, and he goes, "Where's the war room?" And everybody, they go, "It's not here in the White House." And everybody goes, "Well, I saw it in Dr. Strangelove," which sounds funny, but in actuality, we know Kubrick's a stickler for accuracy and detail. So,
yeah.
So walk us through, Leo, your tipping points of becoming educator, writer, critic, curator. Where's your, what are you studying and what are you growing up doing where it goes, I want to do that?
Watching a lot of TV probably helped. And it's funny because I think a lot about this with my own kid, about how much screen time and all this kind of stuff that you've got to think about, and it's a concern. But I certainly was definitely plunked down in front of the TV a lot as a kid, and I watched a lot of it. Crap, tremendous amounts of garbage. But then also, like, some interesting movies would come on. I got into film because I liked movies. I liked the kinds of movies that were made. I was born in 1977. So I was a human boy at exactly the right time for all of the dumb action movies and car chases and machine guns and babes in bikinis, all that stuff. The 80s just nonsense Hollywood blockbuster. I was exactly the right target, for that, and for all the toys that went along with it, laser guns and robots and whatever else you had for me. I ate it all up. But my mother was really her favorite book is, or I don't know, was at the time, I don't know if it still is, but is a book was Rebecca, the original novel Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And so she said, let's watch this movie. And I really liked it. And she said, well, she'd seen a bunch of Alfred Hitchcock movies before, but she didn't really remember them too well. She'd seen she liked Doris Day and Rock Hudson movies and things like that. Brigadoon, she's a big fan of Brigadoon. So I don't know, I just started watching these movies, starting with Hitchcock and Wells and things like that. And it seemed all very, highfalutin and interesting, but it got me really interested. And then going to college, I thought, there's no way I'm going to become a filmmaker, or majoring in film is like a total waste of time. I'm going to do something really useful and major in English literature. At the same time, we had a great film society I went to Vassar College. We had a great film society at the time. I hope they still do, where we would see things on 16 millimeter. You'd see, they'd be playing at least, sort of 2 programs a night, all totally free. I think maybe there was a small entrance fee. So I saw dozens of things. I saw, many things that I still think about, it's crazy that I saw those. I saw, Jan Svankmajer animations. I saw, 60s samurai epics. I saw Betty Gordon's Variety. I saw all these crazy films that were, that seemed to me to kind of come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me because after I graduated from college and had nothing to do and no idea what the hell I was doing, I was like, film is still important to me. And I started writing, and that's when I started sort of doing more sort of freelance writing, and that turned into me going back to school to get degrees in film and so on and so forth. And writing about film also led into curating film, because people.
Right. So really it was the writing first, then being an educator.
Yeah.
Writing criticism, then being an educator.
Yeah.
And then being a curator. So a screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process as a writer? You know, you're doing fiction and not, well, you're doing nonfiction writing, basically. Is that?
Yeah.
But you're still, you got in, you know, what's your intention? What role does intention play? It's more not what is your intention, is what role does intention play in your creative process being a writer?
I think, and this kind of goes back to something I was saying in a different context about creative production in general, is that intentions are really interesting, and obviously that they're often sort of impulses that we follow when we're doing anything, but certainly when we're producing something creative or otherwise, I guess. But those often change and mutate in interesting ways, and oftentimes we don't even really know what we were trying to do until much later. So I always think it's really interesting. I mean, I'm fascinated by interviewing filmmakers and artists. I find it really interesting to talk to them. But I always think, you know, you got to take that with a dose of, you know, salt, you know, just to think a little bit about the way that that person is framing themselves and what makes sense in their mind, what they were doing. But then, you know, oftentimes you'll look at something and be like, that's not at all what they were doing. They were doing something completely different.
Yeah.
And I think that mismatch is interesting. But I mean, I think from a kind of, from the stance of a film critic, in particular, film criticism is just completely obsessed with, or has completely internalized auteurism as just like the, you know, it's just the director of the film is the only person who you have to worry about and have to care about. And every film, especially if a great filmmaker, everything is intentional in that film. There's not a single thing that's not intentional. I think a lot of people look to Kubrick, who you mentioned before, as a kind of auteur par excellence, to use my French here. And I think that that's, you know, that in a way that's very damaging. I think it's very damaging to young filmmakers, especially. I think I see a lot of, because he was somebody, he was also a control freak. He was also very, and in a way he had a very unique process, and it wasn't that the control wasn't what made it good.
No.
You know, in fact, what's great about Kubrick is actually how fucking weird the movies are. I mean, they're just really strange. I mean, the acting is strange. The pacing can be very, very strange, especially as his career went on. And yes, the detail is definitely there and obvious, but that's not it. You know, that's not it. Everything is not a. So I see today, especially in more like contemporary art film. I might be rambling here, but I see more today in contemporary art film. Films, people like Wes Anderson and stuff like that. You know, it's like, it's almost, the film is more like a design project than it is a movie. So I want, you know, I'd say to those people, you know, throw out your Kubrick manual and just do something weird or do something messy. You know, follow those intentions in ways that lead you astray, or throw out the intentions entirely. Yeah. It's hard with writing, the kinds of writing that I do, to be completely free of intention, but I often find that I start a piece of writing thinking it's going to be one thing, and it's something completely different.
Yep.
And most of that is just because I don't write enough. I don't, you know, writing is obviously a very nonlinear process as a whole, but mostly when I write in a kind of linear fashion. And that's very subject to deviation, like rambling in an interview like this.
Oh no, it's beautiful, Leo. That's what I want, is people to feel free to do that, because that's where you can, as Joyce would say, have an epiphany in everydayness or not. It doesn't matter. But you brought up so much great things. I mean, Jay Rosenblatt said it the best. I says, well, how did Sans Soleil affect you? He goes, it made me try to imagine how Marker made it. He didn't go, I've studied all the works of Marker and I figured out how he made it. It was how he imagined. And to me, that's like, it doesn't matter how Marker made it. It's like, wow, how did he get to that point? And this guy told me last week that Kubrick's thing, his theory is the exquisite corpse, where Kubrick, is this a known thing? I was curious that Kubrick collaborated, and it was all about, he wasn't sure what he was doing. Then he would get a collaborator, and then he would go, well, I don't want to do that. I want to do this, and work with him. And, we worked with Niall Southern, Terry's son, who was just in the Pixel Fest this year too, and last year and the next year too. And we had this little playful twist on the pie fight in Strangelove, and he says, no, Terry didn't write Strangelove. It's a big issue. He was hired to write the funny dialogue, or he was hired to write it, but he was like, he wrote the funny dialogue in Strangelove. He didn't get so much. I wrote the screenplay or the co-screenwriter. And then what you said was good, because do you know this guy who made Beaver Trilogy?
Sure, yeah. What is his name?
Oh my God, I'm sorry I can't remember it. But when I interviewed him, I was so intrigued, because that stuff is like, he's going to AFI, and he's making, like Lynch is his like peer, and like when he made that, I was like, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example of intention. Just keep following that intention over and over again, and you'll get different results every time. So that's fun. That's a good lesson about intention right there.
I think his name's Trent. I'm sorry, I forget it, but you can look it up. But I asked him all these questions, and then I also asked James Harris, who did like 8 films with Kubrick, all these same questions. So he only gets credit for 4 the credits, but it's interesting. So Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing your criticism or writing your essays?
It's a great question, actually, because I think in some ways, the way that things are published these days in I would say online, in an academic press, you don't really know who the hell you're talking to. And it could be anybody, really. So that, not that things were so secure in the past, but I think that, these days there's just so many ways in which text circulates, like all media circulates online. And I did have the experience recently of writing something where I really struggled, because it occurred to me halfway through that I didn't know who the hell I was writing it for. I mean, you can't obviously get too bogged down in that, because there's only so much you can do. There's only so much you can anticipate in what people are going to be reading. And I think having confidence in your own voice, and knowing also that you'll be misinterpreted, because that's just how life is, how communication works. Yeah.
It's interesting how, because you write for Film Comment. My friend, I'm making a film with right now, he just thinks that is just such great writing in Film Comment. And you ever read that article Schrader wrote? It's the longest article ever in Film Comment. And
the one about
film canon.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm freaked out because he mentions McLuhan. It's like Schrader's mentioned McLuhan, but it is an amazing, I mean, you have good credentials, Brooklyn Rail, Film Comment. But what do you think of that? The question to people like James Agee, Manny Farber, and Pauline Kael. Do you think they were because to me, they're great writers, whatever, it doesn't matter what they're writing about.
Sure.
But they chose film. Were they, in your opinion, aware in writing, knowing who their readers were? Or did they become writers without that? Like, how much do you think that swayed them?
I mean, they were writing in a unique context in which they definitely had a very clearly defined publication and readership. This is a little bit of what I'm talking about, and that like most people today aren't staff writers. Most people today aren't the sort of lead critic for the whatever. They're just freelancers, so they're writing for all kinds of places, and they sometimes have to shift gears a little bit. Whereas I think somebody like Pauline Kael kind of had a sense of who her readership, she would have been able to have at least I would think would have been able to have a better idea of what her readership was like than most people writing today. But I mean, you mentioned, that they're fundamentally they're just writing. I mean, sure, they're writing about film, but they are also just writers. And I think that that's something that to bear in mind with a lot of this stuff is that, it should, to me, it should be good as writing. It should be readable. I mean, not everything needs to be readable by every single person. Obviously, that would be absurd. But I do think that it should at least be, if you appreciate good writing, you should be able to appreciate. I would like to think that I write in a way, that's what I'm trying to do. I don't know if I succeed in doing that, but
Yeah, is the word accessible? What is the word you mean? Meaning it's readable?
Yeah, and maybe not accessible is the wrong word, but it should be or enjoyable.
Enjoyable.
So if you like reading and you're interested in ideas and art and concepts, but you don't know much about film, that you could read it and know that. Now, and I don't know, I don't know that I definitely don't think I always succeed in doing that. Of course, I mean, I don't, I think it's a really hard thing because sometimes you really, and there are occasions when I really do want to be speaking to a sort of smaller community, and I think that that's okay to be addressing, people who are more in a particular world of experimental film or of documentary film. I mean, these are niche, kind of interests perhaps for their little enclaves in a way, but you should be able to speak, to each other and, directly, but I don't,
No, it's good because I was lucky enough to interview Bill Nichols for 2 sessions like this. And I was just wondering, since we're closing in on 90 minutes, is if we could possibly schedule a part 2 somewhere 3 or 4 months down the line, because I've only got to a third of maybe a quarter of the questions. And I really appreciate your time. But who are some of the writers that you like to read? I mean, were those 3 you did, or are there any film writers that stand out for you? Maybe just a couple.
Yeah, I mean, my friend Erica Balsam, who is based in the UK, she is somebody whose work I like a lot, and I love, and I respect a lot her ability to weave between kind of scholarly discourses and more public facing, as they like to say, more some journalistic kind of critical practice. And also between film and art and all these different ways. And I think she does that in a way that very much maintains a voice rather than, she has to swap out her, her toolkit for one or the other. There are a lot of, I mean, I think there are a lot of writers whose work I always really enjoy reading. Another mentress, I don't know, at my editor at Editrix at 4 Columns, Melissa Anderson, who is a great critic who's been a very active critic in New York for past couple decades. She was a lead film critic for the Village Voice for a little while. She's written for all kinds of places, but she's now 4 Columns is her domain, and she's somebody whose writing I always enjoy. And think is very smart and perceptive and funny, which I think is also important.
Really important, yes.
There are many more.
That was good. You really flushed it out. And so McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. Or he called a human sensorium. So knife and fork extends our teeth. Shutter in a camera might be an extension of our eyelid, and maybe even non-tangible like religion or philosophy might be an extension of consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend for you? Whether it's a pen or a keyboard, what humanness is extended by your writing utensil?
I'm sort of wondering if it always works too. It's it's a utensil, imperfect utensil, whatever it might be. I have this image of the utensil extending, up my fingers. This whole conversation's got me very Cronenbergian.
Yeah.
Or even think about his film of Naked Lunch, which I watched again after hadn't seen it and maybe since it came out, and I watched again pretty recently, which I thought was a really good, a really great film about writing. Because I think the one thing I think this is going to answer your question. The one thing that I really love is there's moments in that film where he's talking to somebody, and maybe his editor, I can't remember, but they'll say something about the thing that he wrote, and he won't have any recollection of it because he's just like drugged out and it's all in a dream. Yeah. But the idea that you've written something, and it's partly this odd, techno corporeal collaboration with your machine, with your extension, with your McLuhan-esque extension, implement. Yeah. And then after that, you don't even really remember because it's just too much like sex or drugs or something like that. It's somehow you're not really sure you actually did it, but because you're just too connected to the process, but also maybe to the materials involved. That's what I think about it.
Yeah, that's you covered a lot there, because Cronenberg is hugely influenced by McLuhan. What's his face plays the McLuhan in Videodrome.
Yeah,
Woods. But I used to have an audio cassette of that soundtrack for Naked Lunch, and I'd play it all the time because it's Howard Smith, but he hired Ornette to play all the solos.
Yeah, Ornette's soloing through the entire movie. It's incredible.
It is incredible. Yeah, I remember that film. Seen it in a big theater too. So, Leo, this has been a pleasure. Do you mind if I send you dates and we book another one, part 2 down the road? It would be really fun. And like in Madison says, we'll finally get to film in part 2. No, we dabbled a lot, and I really appreciate it. I learned so much, and I appreciate your time and energy and all your writing. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button now, I hope we can keep talking forever and ever, especially into part 2. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. See you later.